we can get started. So, we're here to talk about Him, Me, Muhammad Ali by Randa Jarrar. And yeah, I was not expecting. Oh, hey, Lauren. Lauren's about to come in. Um, I was just so pleasantly surprised by how much I liked this book. I hadn't read short fiction and like magical realism style in so long. So having this format and also kind of like the broken down versions of like it just seems so approachable when it's already like in three sections because you're like, okay, I could do that. But yeah, overall I thought it was awesome. Um, we do have a couple like discussion questions, but are there any stories that like stood out to you guys in particular or like things you liked about the book in general?
I agree with you so much. There's something so satisfying about reading like short magical realist stories because you just like especially in how they're broken up into the three. I totally agree. I was trying to find like a connection. I was like, did they all connect? Like I was trying to do something, but I'm like, no, they're just like I think they're just like little individual stories, and I loved it so much. I'm so glad you guys recommended this because I had never heard of this book before, and I was like just so invested. I read it in like 3 days, like 3 nights. It was so good. Also, I got it from the library and someone had the Wheel of Fortune tarot card in it as the bookmark. So I was like I was like, oh, should I
That's
read
so
into this? I think I
fun.
will. I know. So I'm like, I don't know. I actually want to have your input. Should I like leave it in here for the next person or should I like keep it as like a token?
Ooh, well, what story was
Something to
it in?
think about. Something to think about. What story was it in? Let me look. So I remember like where about it was.
Do you know what
Also, what
that
is the
tarot
card?
card means?
Oh, that's what I was.
Wheel of Fortune.
Yeah, like what, I don't know
Yeah, it's
anything about that.
um I actually really like it for the story because it is like supposed to be like choice and like let me read the hold on, I have the little guidebook here. But it's basically just like it's kind of like the world, but more like focused here. I have a little guide. I'm so terrible at explaining. Destiny, fortune, success, and luck, and like abundance and that good stuff. So I just thought that was so interesting. I was like, hey, I
I feel
opened it
like
up. I was like, wow.
for you.
Do you
Dare
think
I
it's for
say?
me?
Yeah.
I'll think about it. I can't remember what story it was in. It could have been in the one about like I think it was the one about the girl who was kidnapped into the or like taken into that I commune. I don't know what to call it. Grace, that one. So interesting. Anyway, that's my little story. I loved the book. Thought it was amazing.
Um, First, hi everyone. My camera's off because I'm feeling under the weather, but I really love this book and I was like, I just have to come talk about it. Um, so yeah, I really like the magical realism. I was hungry for some fiction and like it totally satisfied that craving. It's exactly what I needed. And I feel like I went back to the library and started looking more seriously at the fiction section after this also just because I thought this was like it was so well done and like the author's ability to convey like such raw emotions like through these small stories and like character building, I was just like amazed. So that was awesome. And also speaking of kind of um like curious circumstances, I guess, Mackie, this just kind of reminded me. I love the trapeze artist mention in the first story. And then I watched a movie, it was Wings of Desire by Ingmar Bergman, and I only got halfway through because it's long AF. and slow af, but it was really good. And like one of the main characters is a trapeze artist. And I was like, what? That's crazy. And then what are the odds of me encountering two different like trapeze artists like metaphors in the same day? And then I started reading this other book called Geek Love by Catherine Dunn, and one of the main characters also was a trapeze artist. Yeah, so I'm thinking about what all that means. But yeah, I really liked
That's
it.
that is so funny because that just I didn't even think about this, but I just had a dream about like the trapeze artist like a couple nights ago, like when I was reading this book.
Wait, please
That's
share.
so interesting. I love that story. It was just so cool. Like I my dreams are so vivid and I really wish I could like draw them or like capture them in some way. But it was like so interesting. It was like this old video of a trapeze artist and like I can't even explain it, but it had like it was so cool. It was like old circus, but like in a cool, ethical way, I think. Like no like animals being abused, so that's awesome. But yeah, it was really cool. We were just like watching this trapeze artist. It was like a circus town. It was so weird. It was awesome. But yeah, I think like the first story was one of my favorites really because I was like I love the way that she just kind of launches you into it. Like I love that that's like the first one. It's kind of like I don't know, sets the tone for the whole book, I think. That's so
Definitely
fun.
agree. There was like so much, the description of it, I felt like I could see it. It was just so beautiful and I don't know, gut-wrenching too. I think one of the themes that like I just kept going back to throughout the book was like depictions of woman and femininity and like what it meant to like be a woman like in these spaces. Um, okay, sorry that I'm getting texts. But um yeah, I want to look for a quote, but in the meantime, if someone else has a comment.
The first story I really loved because I think whenever anybody talks about the moon, I'm like, you're onto something. And I love love stories that are like cosmic in nature because I think it just made it like just you feel the gravity of it and like you feel like how big and like unimaginable like things can be and like it just like it adds like new stakes to like the story and the first that so obviously that was the first story that I read in this book, but one book that I love that we like put in the Medium app is Still Life with Woodpecker, which is like if you're a Kurt Vonnegut fan, I feel this is a good one. But it's just so like sweet and it's really absurd. Like the writing is like it's really ridiculous and like goofy, but the whole book is like it's like the tagline is it's a love story that takes place in this Camel cigarette box and then all they're like it's all about like the moon and like yeah. So it like reminded me of that and I like love that book. So it was like that was a good place to start. And but yeah, I think that Lauren said it really nicely. Like she just really has a way with words and like being able to describe emotion and feeling in like few few words. Um which is really nice. And like I think with like it being short stories, like you're really able to see like the range of like writing ability and like um because it spans like so many different like characters and time, place, and everything, which is really just fun. And yeah, I haven't been able to get into fiction like really like in a minute, so this was like a fun way to ease back into it, I think.
Yeah, I love a good short story compilation. That's like the most easily digestible way. Like, I also don't really read a lot of fiction, but the fiction that I have read has been short stories. Like, I read a lot of Jum Jhumpa Lahiri's books recently, and it's kind of similar, just like detail, emotion-filled short stories, and they're all fiction. And I was just gonna say that this book, like all the short stories, they were filled with so much emotion, but also just like the little details added up. Um, like that the first one, the characters' names, like they both mean moon too, which I love. Like Gama means moon and Hilal means like crescent moon, I guess. And it's just like the little details that add up that kind of snatch, I guess, the short stories together and make them cohesive. I really like I like that style, I guess.
I love that. I didn't know that, and I feel like that just makes it so much better.
Yeah, I love it.
Yeah, I also really love the details and how they're kind of squished in at times. Like you can like read past it, and then you're like, wait, I need to read that again to see like what you were being like cheeky in that moment, or like it'll make me like laugh out loud. So I was looking for on like page 7, when she says so she incorporated, suspecting it would take riskier moves for her death wish to come true, she incorporated a pigeon, and then in parentheses it says a vulture. And that made me laugh because I'm just like, okay, it's just so silly to describe a pigeon as a vulture because they're so like distinct in our heads. But since everything else is equally as like ridiculous, you kind of just like let it slide and like you're even more like open to the world that's there. Also, as I started speaking about the pigeon, I don't know if you guys can hear my birds. They're not mine, but they're right by my window. They started like yelling so loud. I don't know what they're saying, but if you guys understand, let me know. Maya, who's gonna be half bird soon. Per
So
your
true.
wish.
They're probably in our discussion with us, talking about
True.
the book.
Okay. When it's like short stories like this, I know it's like really hard to compare one to the other because they're so like distinct. But with the talk of like details, I really liked I think it was like the second to last story. The one of like the father who was like an architect. Oh, A Frame for the Sky. About the dad and who ended up like living in like New York and stuff. I just really loved the details of like his trips to the United States and like what he thought was like interesting and actually like caught his attention. And then on like page 177, when he said that 1991 afternoon in New York, after receiving the exiling call, I shaved and we walked up to the Empire State Building. Like even the detail, like I shaved. Um, I reread it again and I kind of just like paused for a bit because I'm like, she didn't really need to add that, but it does just add so much. And like not just a man seeking like professionalism, but like a man of color, like an Arab man seeking to like fit in this professional world and like ask for a job and adding like like those small details like I shaved just really spoke volumes to the time. And I feel like in that story in general, I felt such like a wave of like anticipation because it there was so much like call to the worst day of his life and lots of like talks of death, which is just present throughout so much of the book, especially in this first story that we're talking about. Like her constantly like searching for like making all these risky moves to bring about like her own death and A Frame for the Sky alluding to like deaths in the family, but with like the timestamps, I obviously was thinking about like 9/11, so I was like, when is 9/11 gonna come up? When is it gonna come up? When is it gonna come up? And it did like eventually, and they didn't go in depth as like I thought that maybe like the story would because that's what I was feeling like super nervous about. But yeah, I just was always on the lookout for kind of like how death was being portrayed.
The verse on 186 in that story also my like heart literally stopped because it was so just beautiful. Like yeah, the in autumn he will die like a fig, shriveled, sweet, and full of himself. The leaves dry out on the ground, and the naked branches point to the place where there is time for everything. Wow. The the one, I think it's, oh wait, no, it's the him, me, Muhammad Ali story, I think was probably one of my favorites as well. That was like all about like death and dying, but and grieving, but it was like I think yeah, just very um I really enjoyed it.
I too loved that story so much. And I thought it was really interesting the way they talk about race in that story with her father. Okay, I need to look back on the details, but where is her father from? So I know he is a black man, but is he like an American black man or okay, I'll need to check. But even when they speak about like her and um like when they mention like oh you went all the way to Africa to bring home like the lightest skinned woman in the world and then how they would like tell her be like oh you look so I forgot what word they used. But they would use anything to describe her except like black. They didn't want to add that, but they'd be like, "Oh, like your hair, like you look just like this," or like, "Oh, this is so normal." Um, and like people calling her like oh, so like living in Australia and then that her being compared to like an Aboriginal like person and her like being really upset by that. And then her mom kind of just saying, um, you're 12, everyone looks ugly. Looks like an ugly aborigine, is it? Yeah, I don't know. At that age. Um, that just really caught my attention.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's on 157 where she's like, the guard was speaking to me in English and then she answered in Arabic,
Oh yeah.
like foreigner is what it sounds
Mm-hmm.
like, like a tourist basically.
Yeah. But the whole like twist of that story too, like at the end, just was very like funny, but also um I also felt like a lot of sympathy and found myself like wanting to know more about like her mom and her relationship with her mom, like as she was like reminiscing and like thinking back on all these details. And also just like the way like the match was going on and she found out she was pregnant and by the end of the match of her being like you are going to come with me and you are going to marry me and by the end they were engaged. I was like, damn, that is just not what you would like want out of a story, but it is like that's just what happens.
I couldn't tell if well I thought at first that like when in during the match when it said that she had thrown up or something, um I didn't realize that that was like her being pregnant. At first I thought it was like her first sign of her illness, um which I didn't like I couldn't really tell what it was at the end, like what she had passed from, but um I I don't know if that was like done on purpose, I guess, that it could have been either one of them or not, because they didn't she didn't the author didn't really like mention the details of the illness. It was just kind of like these little images that the character was remembering as she was like remembering the mom.
I love like the way that the author chooses to focus on some things and not others. Like I think it's really intentional. Like there are lots of references to like the overwhelming like culture and society, but it's mainly just like personal and like familial relational ties that she's kind of discussing. I love that. I think that's like I don't know. You could like even though they were like fantastic stories or whatever, there's a lot of realism too. Um, and I love that about the book.
Um, I was thinking about the Grace story. Um, because that one kind of like it kind of caught me off guard a little bit just because it was like, oh, I didn't see a story like this kind of story like being in this collection. Um, like just because of the I guess the topic and everything. So I was curious about y'all's thoughts on that story and what we thought maybe like themes were. I think I had a hard time like not a hard time with the themes necessarily, but yeah, just curious to know more about that one.
Which one are you referring to?
Grace.
Oh, Grace. I thought you
Yes,
said race.
I said no,
Grace.
Grace.
Okay.
Yeah, sorry.
No, you're that was one that like really stood out to me. Um, I think um
That one was really interesting to me because it almost felt like, like what happened to a lot of indigenous people in America. And the
Mhm.
fact that it took place in America felt really significant to me in like the suburbs.
Hmm.
Um, so I don't, yeah, I was kind of also that one feels different than the rest. I agree. Um, but it's like a lot of the stories to me just feel like you know, being not feeling like what is home to people and where do you feel like connected to, and just how interesting it is that like this child chose to follow this life and never like sought to kind of rediscover her old life. Like I thought that was really interesting, and like I don't know, I kind of like that she left it open-ended and like didn't really explain like the motives behind it, because I doubt like the character even knew why, just that that's, you know, kind of how it was. So I think that's really interesting.
Yeah, I'm sad to say that this one is one that didn't stand out to me. And like reading it, like I'm kind of skimming through right now because like two of you guys have like mentioned it already. So I feel like I do need to like reread it. But I think this is one of those like when you read and your brain is kind of just like also thinking about other things.
Yeah, I think I had like I think it stood out to me because I had like I think that like loss displacement broadly is something that is like kind of common through like a lot of the stories, but I think the idea of like being stolen from like your family is something that's like really visceral. So I was
Mhm.
like, and I think like the main character, like in the beginning, like reminisces a lot about like her relationship to her sister and like how she remembered her like kind of stuck in time, and then like in her child brain, and like she was like I'm making up stories about like all of my family that I had like once known, and then like the and then like but still like she's trying to connect back to it because or like her somewhere deep within her there's still a desire to like connect or like to find some like semblance of like her past family, and like her finding it in like the 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 child that had come in and then like resembled her sister, and like there's still like that something like telling her that, and then yeah, and then like her finding the book at the library and like reading it like about herself, like that was just crazy to me. And I can imagine, and like I think one of the I was reading like a review of the book, and like this was one story that they had like um stuck on because they were stuck on because like the yeah, it's just like so I can imagine how like it would be really crazy to be like, should I reach out? Should I not reach out? Should I find her? And then to like find that she had been thought of all along but never like reached out to. And I can imagine how like crazy that would feel.
I also think this is maybe the only story in the book where the character is white or white passing, which is really interesting. They describe like her like porcelain skin and having like very like blonde hair. So I just think it's like I don't know, I kind of forgot that detail, but it's like definitely interesting because of I don't know. I think it might be the only one. I'm not sure. But yeah.
Yeah, I was gonna say in addition to like the themes of home or like finding where your home is and displacement and stuff, I think one of the biggest themes of the book is familial matters, I guess, because each one kind of um has a lot to do with family in some way or another. I haven't, disclaimer, I haven't read like the last stories, I don't know, but for all the other ones at least. Um I don't know, I noticed that they touch on family in some way or another. And I mean, I think families emphasized in Arab culture in general, so it makes sense that all these stories kind of revolve around that in some way or another. But yeah, I also found out that was interesting that the main character in this particular story was not Arab in some way. I think all the other ones were like that.
Yeah, and with like the theme of family, um, I really like the story, the accidental transients. Um, that one definitely caught my attention and also made me think a lot. It kind of like piqued my interest to see how the author was like portraying like marriage and like the respectability politics of marriage versus like what people actually want for themselves, which right away is like touched upon like in like the first story. And I think like this one too. So being like in the world of a daughter who is still a good daughter for like being at home and like still caring for her family and taking the role of like a mother after her mother had left because she didn't want to like um carry that role like herself and was like offered something like quote like better, but also being a letdown at the same time because she wasn't in some like very like prestigious like or like respectable role in like her career or married or any of those things and was more focused on like being a hairstylist and just like seeing how the contradictions with like how her brother, even though he was marrying someone who was outside of like their own religion and like a Catholic girl, he was still getting a lot of respect for like at least being married and how angering like that could be. But that like the dynamic in that family really caught my attention and I think I also found myself relating to it a lot as like with elements of culture, like Latin American culture, where like daughters are expected to most like often than not like live at home until they get married, which a lot of the times it's like not the case for people like living in the United States. Um, but a lot of like family members that like are in like Latin America do have like those same like expectations. But seeing how kind of easy it was for her mother to have like this life that is like all like so like established, but once she had like an out of someone like promising her like something that wasn't being like a caregiver, like how willing she was to like jump on it and kind of like check out of the picture without much like emotional regard like to like her family makes you feel like you pick up on the sense of like betrayal, but hearing what it's like for the daughter to be in that situation like herself like all the time, you're like, do I really want to blame her? And like you wonder like, does she blame her? Like, because she would kind of like do the same. Um, but yeah, I feel like there's such like a big emphasis on like secrets and who's keeping them and who gets to like be in on them too. And I forgot who the girl was like in the or which client was that talked about like having a boyfriend and like having to hide under the seats whenever like she drove by and then she was laughing at her being like that's so silly, but then the story ends with her also like being with her friend, her like male friend, and like hiding down because she like didn't want to be judged like in her neighborhood. um and yeah, there's just a lot that definitely was that was like catching my attention from like that story.
Yeah, I also was really interested by the family dynamics because it seemed like they all depended on her, but at the same time didn't really show their gratitude at all and kind of were like, well, wouldn't matter if you weren't here and all that. And in the end, her not really like telling anyone in her family about the car accident and all that. Um, I don't know. It was I just like saw the eldest daughter of immigrant family like trope so clearly there. Um, yeah, I don't know. It was interesting the way that the dynamic between the rest of them and her as the daughter worked.
To be honest, that one didn't. I didn't like. I feel like that. What Stephanie, how you felt about the other. This is how I felt about this one. Because I think I need to like reread it. I think I zoned out when I did read it. Um, but like just
Happens to
how
the best of us.
it happens. Like it happens. Um, the one that I like that I think kind of reminded me how you guys are describing it brought me back to story number two, which building girls.
Mhm. Ugh.
That
Crazy
one.
crazy, but I think that that like I think the like yeah, like just like the theme of like familial and cultural influence on like romantic partnership was something that stood out in that one. But I just loved it because I think he did such a good, like, excellent job of like just trying to describe describing like yeah, yearning.
Mm-hmm.
Mm.
I love it when I love it when people do that. Um yeah.
I feel like with the yearning, it made me feel kind of like sad. I felt so stuck while reading it, and yeah, I guess that pretty much does like capture what yearning is, like b being stuck in like that position. But with the idea of like who being considered like having that freedom and what that means, and there's just like so many ways it could be like described, like either um like buzzwords like nowadays with like financial freedom, or like location based, going back a little bit back to like the other story as well, like in the accidental transients. I know they talk about like, oh, isn't it so fun to live in like the middle of nowhere, like you must be so free. And then here in this one, um imagining like the people who the guests who are coming and seeing them as free for having like the ability to like come and go in this place, whereas like she's being seen as having freedom. um if I remember correctly, she's not with the father, right? Like the did he
Mm.
pass away or like did divorce? I don't know.
Um, are we talking about building girls?
Yeah.
Okay. I think she's not with the father because she describes him as like an asshole.
Oh, okay, okay.
So you like left him.
Um, yeah. And yeah, I'd say like that's another um element of freedom, to like be able to leave your partner like after being married. I'm not sure if it was in this story or if one like later on where they described like leaving a marriage and like the parents kind of like being really upset with her. Was it this one? Okay, okay. But still it's an element of like freedom to finally be like away from like um a a toxic like partnership, and yeah. Let me find.
I'm also like looking at this and remembering about like the freedom of, well, the perceived freedom of girlhood. Like no one, like it
Mm.
says on page 28, it says, when I was little, I wore a nightie in the street. No one looked at me. No one whistled at me. I felt invisible and happy. I had no money and I was happy. You know, it's
Mhm.
like that is so so real. Even, I mean, not that that's all girls experience, but
Mhm.
it's definitely less perceived when you're a child, and that's like another big freeing element. I love the description of them as kids too. Like something about that was so sweet.
Mhm.
When she's like, we both laughed, big laughs that stole away our breath, cascading giggles and tears. Like so, like sometimes I'm just like, yeah, you you ate with that one.
Yeah, this story I feel like was like the most emotional one for me, just because it touched on so many, like the girlhood theme, growing up, and like old friends, like all of that, and like also class, I feel like was definitely tied into it as well, and like travel and everything. It just was so, I thought it was so well done. Yeah, did not expect the twist ending, we'll say, but yeah. It was so like I just felt like it was there was like it was like a movie. You know what I mean? Like I could imagine all of it. It was so awesome.
This one was definitely my favorite story too. And just because I was talking about names before, Harry Han means like beautiful woman, which I mean,
Mhm.
I was trying to look to see if we knew the like characters, like the narrator's name, but the fact that, because it's not like an Arab name, I think it's like Turkish or something. So I looked it up and it's like beautiful woman. And it was just like that little detail again that got me too.
Yeah, and with what you were saying, Mackie, about like the freedom of girlhood, um, then later on, I think an element of like freedom of womanhood, of her like asking questions like, oh, do you ever bring anyone up here, like all those things, like, oh, there's no one I could like bring up because like it wasn't like respectable for her to be seen with a man, but she was finally able to have um like a very like lust filled like experience because it what like no one was going to even that thought wouldn't have like crossed someone else's mind as inappropriate for her to like spend alone time or like share this intimacy with a woman as long because like yeah no one's mind would bring it to like the nature of the relationship being like sexual at all, but that brought them freedom, and good thing it did. Good thing for us as readers that it did.
I think another, because in that like same line, she's like, uh, I don't bring men up. I don't bring men up here, but I like think about them and then like pleasure myself. And like I think that was like a theme like through a lot of the stories too, was like her talking about like masturbation. Like I think it came up a lot honestly because like the one story, okay, the him me Muhammad Ali story when she's literally like I can't tell him that I'm gonna go spread my dad's ashes and then go masturbate, like that was crazy. But I think like that there's something there.
Hmm.
There's
I
something.
love when she called her vibrator her boyfriend to
Yeah.
her, like cousin or something.
Like this is my boyfriend for now.
This is my dad and this is my boyfriend. Like, that was so funny to me.
Yeah.
I thought that was so interesting too because it's kind of like a lot of it isn't perceived as like I just feel like it was interesting to kind of like tie erotic themes without like necessarily being like not necessarily having like overt sexuality or something. Like I don't know if I described that right, but I feel like there's a lot of things that are like erotic in here, but there's not like a lot of sex really, which I
Mhm.
think is really interesting because of how like the magical realism of it is kind of like all, the erotic doesn't have to mean like overtly sexual. I just think that's really interesting too.
Yeah, it's like hidden or behind the scenes kind of more than it is, I don't know, out there.
I feel like a lot of the stories center like self-exploration because it's like the a lot of them are, I mean, most of them I think are written in like first person, so you see like the characters like what they're going through. And so it is like kind of relational in nature, but like we're really centered on like the self and like identity and like so like I feel like self pleasure just kind of like naturally is like tied into that. And I think it yeah, I think I think Rhonda does a good job of doing it in a way that's like very yeah, like yeah.
Yeah. I think that made me think a lot of like back to like the religion and spirituality and the curiosity made me think also about like Hitomi. If you guys know Hitomi, like the YouTuber yoga like um person. So Maya, do you know who that is? If not, I could give it. Okay. So Hitomi is like this one like influencer basically who makes like videos and just shares a lot about her own journey with spirituality, but she's like very open with it and speaks about like she'll often talk about things like, oh, yeah, thank you, Mackie. You know me, Hitomi. Um she talks a lot about like masturbation and sex, and when she does talk about like sexuality, she focuses a lot on she can have like a 20-minute video about masturbation, but it's not one that's like overtly like sexualized. It kind of just does talk about like the self-exploration and like the mental um journey that you go on like with masturbating when it is removed from porn or thinking that you have to make something up about someone you know or something that's like very sexy or like sparking up like all these like erotic images to get yourself like turned on. Rather, she like talks about like just the self-exploration and kind of just like interest in like your own body. And I haven't read Pleasure Activism by Adrienne Marie Brown, but I have seen like some like clips of interviews where like they kind of talk about, yeah, like pleasure as like being at a stoplight and kind of massaging your neck because you want your muscles to be like loose and like you want to kind of explore like what position would be like most comfortable for you like in that moment is like a way to like give yourself pleasure without like also like teetering into like overindulgence and like instant gratification like with like what we're used to. But yeah, I definitely thought about that with like this story. And also I would have to see which one it's called, but the one with like the little girl when they accidentally like run over the little girl. And I think in that one they mention like exploring each other's when they would play like mannequin and like freeze up and like look inside each other's like shirts and like see what's there. And this caught my attention because I was like, damn, that's so messed up. But she said that her mom, oh, Asaham, I think is
Asmahan,
Asaham,
yeah.
yeah. The mom says the devil has whispered in your ears and that's why you're curious about each other's bodies, and how like that how much that scarred her as a child. So later when her daughter was like telling her stories of her doing something similar, she told her daughter, she was like, hey, like that's actually very normal, and like it's okay if like you're curious about like exploring like your body or like someone else's, and like kind of removing the sexual, it is like a very sexual experience, but removing like everything that all like the negative connotations and like the gawking that we could have as like readers when like being brought into like this world, especially when it is first person. And it does like make me think about I've seen like video essays on like horror films when they talk about like how sex is portrayed in horror films. So you often get like the point of view of someone like creeping in, or it's meant to look as like you are the one committing like an act of intrusion, or like groping a character, or doing something like sexual, but as like the audience, you get to like ride along that and like experience that high too. Whereas like this story does take you through like sexual elements, but much more, yeah, very, very like open to exploration and sensitive to like that person's like needs and like desires in that moment, and more like reminiscent of what like like the average person like looks for um through sex, because it isn't always just like sex for pleasure. Sometimes it's like sex for like grief, or sex for exploration, or sex for um like longing. And yeah, so going back to Building Girls, that's why I thought it was like really sad with like the very last lines when like she's leaving and they're talking about like language, and it says you should teach Anna Arabic, I said. You should teach Shadia English. She joked, tweezing at a small hand mirror. Perry, how will they talk when they get older? And then she says, like, oh, they'll find a way. Believe me, they'll still have the language that they have now. And then she says, like, I nodded to be polite, but I didn't believe it. And oh, it was just so heartbreaking.
Yeah, that was a little bit gut-wrenching. It was, because I think it's just a very real emotion, and also like experience like growing and changing and these like lifelong relationships, and like not necessarily in a way where it's like things are going to be worse, but they're different. So like that's why when she said we'll have the same, like, oh, they'll still have the same language, it's like maybe they won't, maybe it'll be different, and like that's okay, but that's just a crazy thing to grapple with. But I also like that that kind of like came early on in the book, um because it was so emotional, that like got me into this place where I was like thinking about my own relationships, and I was like, whoa, okay. Yeah, I'm glad that that was early on. And I don't remember what story came after. Lost in Yonkers, which I liked a lot too. That one was very, it was like kind of like, it felt like a little bit of a contrast to the last story, just because of like like I guess like personalities of the two main characters.
Mm.
Um, but yeah, also a very emotional one might say, because she's like literally pregnant. Yeah.
Yeah,
I,
looking at the, oh, sorry, go ahead.
no, you go, you go.
No, please, I just said a
No,
comment.
you go. Okay. Um, the I think that there are some real world correlates to this story because Rhonda was a teen mom and had, so I think that like I'm unsure, but I can imagine that there was some like personal elements that like she was able to apply to like this story. Um, that's all I was gonna say.
Yeah,
I
I
didn't know.
was just gonna say it's like funny. I thought this one was like elements of what I was like mentioning earlier, like contrast, like on 47 being like the neighboring town where I go to college is considered so safe. And then it in parentheses says read white, that people leave their doors unlocked. And then later on it'd be on the same page it says which was not only left unlocked but ajar. And then in like parentheses it says he stresses this word. I think he's proud of himself for knowing it. And those are just things where you're just like, yeah, like the insider comments.
On page 44, it says, I say to him sweetly in Arabic, my love, you son of a whore, I hope you die. What's that mean, baby? He wants to know and I lie. It means I'll love you forever and ever. Like I did a spit take. I did a spit take at that.
Yeah.
And then on the next page, him calling her his like Arabic princess. I'm like, oh, this is
Yeah.
like
Oh. Yeah.
Yeah, this one seems um I don't know, when I was reading it, I could feel like the real world elements a bit more. I don't know if that's just in the way that he was writing it or not, but it kind of like I know a lot of them were in first person narrative, but this one seems like it's just the character's thoughts, like you're in their brain as you're going through the story, and it's so all the little details make it seem so real.
The end was really goofy too. Like when the main character kept like hitting cars and then she was like, well, I'm having a baby tomorrow, and then everybody just like looked the other way. And um and yeah, I was like, yeah, she deserves that. Hit as many cars as you want.
this this part like literally hit close to home because the one time I've been in like a car accident, the lady backed into me and was like, I'm so sorry, like I was going to my kid's school and like I literally was like, okay, like I just let her go. I was like my parents were like, you just let her go. I was like, yes, I don't deserve to own a car for many reasons, but God bless America, I guess. It's just funny. I
Yeah.
just like I don't know. I I was gonna say this earlier, it's kind of out of place now, but like just how like matter of fact she is like something I really like. Like everything is, even though it's like a fantasy in a way, like a fiction book, everything feels very just natural, and like the way she talks about things without like the shame, I guess. I like that's something that really stood out to me too. I don't know, I was just thinking about that. I just kind of went on a tangent, but I and like her as a person is just like someone I who's like from what I've seen, so I haven't seen much about her, but from what I have seen, it's just like she's a person who like has overcome a lot and kind of lives without shame, and I think that makes me think of Adrienne Marie Brown too, just talking about like being like a queer person of color in America,
Mm.
like and just like being so open about like your sexuality and your needs and your like creative vision and like politically too. Like it's just so amazing to me, and something like I feel like shame is something Americans feel so like acutely that it's just like very I don't know, it's very beautiful to see such like taboos discussed so matter of fact and openly, because you know it is just like parts of life. I think it's, and like the way we talk about death too, like death and sex are like something that Americans, you know, do not touch. Like I think the closest we get to death and sex is Halloween and Valentine's Day. Like, so much to think about.
Yeah, I also found myself thinking a lot about shame. Um, and guys, I mean, please, like, um, I'll say what I'm gonna say first, then you'll see why I'm hesitant. But so I was watching Kill Bill, um, the second volume where like towards the end where Bill is kind of just like, you know, the thing about my favorite hero is Superman because his costume is what is it? Is it Clark Kent, like the Superman's name? He's like, yeah, so he's like he plays like a nerdy guy who's like pretty insecure, and he's like that's his interpretation of the whole human race because he's actually like from like another planet and like landed here. So he views humans as like really insecure and like shy and and that whole I don't know why that just kept coming up in my head like as I was reading this because I was trying not to like I found myself like connecting it to my own element, to my own like feelings and times where like I've experienced shame just because some of these like characters are so like brash and like willing to just call things like what they are and or experience like really intense emotions but go along with their day like if nothing happened um and I found that to be like really like admirable in a way even though like in some parts it did feel a little bit like, hey, you should take a moment to like digest that or unpack what's happening here. But yeah, lots of lots of shame, and I feel like a lot of it was tied specifically to like religion and like what yeah, like religious contexts. Which, okay, speaking of religion, the one I think Ashaman oh wait, let me find it. When I think it's Soraya, she yeah, Asmaham. Guys, how how do we say that? Um, she was talking about how she made a deal with God, saying if she saved her daughter, she would start wearing like a hijab and do it like every day, even though she was like this like fashion icon. And then her daughter was saved. And now every day she like went from being like a very like non-religious person and was pretty much like still giving like not really religious, but she did make that promise and it did come true. So there was obviously still like those elements of like fear or like within her and also like respect for the fact that like her daughter still was like alive and even though like her cousins like tease her and call her like um Remy the preemie like that's just so ridiculous but yeah seeing seeing like those elements of religion also like really caught my attention. The juxtaposition basically of like extreme like conservatives and people who were like moving through like the each story like very and they were pretty much like anarchists in like what they were saying.
I think it's interesting too that like what we hear from these characters is their like inner world. So we don't necessarily know how like they are being perceived on the outside, except like save a couple of stories. Like I forget the one where she's the hairstylist, like she's very open with her family about like some things, but other things are like completely hidden. And I just think that's like so interesting to think of like, if the perspective were from another character's point of view, would they see like that anarchist, like like deeply emotional person, or would they also like see them as kind of, I don't know, just just normal, I guess. I think that's fun to think about too.
The two um the two animal stories I really enjoyed, the last one and then the one about the prisoner. Um Number 287690. Um I thought I really I thought those were crazy. And I don't think we've talked about those yet. But the last one, which Maya, I know you haven't read it, but when you do read it, you're gonna understand the um the icebreaker question is gonna hit different. Um,
Okay.
but yeah, I think like that one was really interesting, like how how she talks about like being half ibex as like a disability,
Mm-hmm.
and um then like yeah, I think the whole discussion around shame is really present here too, because of like her family just trying to like erase any semblance of like what of this like familial curse that they have, which is being half ibex, and so she's like unable to find any like history of it, like in her grandma, and like she didn't. Well, I'm not gonna spoil anything actually, so um, but yeah, like, and then like yeah, with her dad and stuff, like I thought it was very. I think the imagery was like really interesting and like uh yeah, yeah. And then the other one, the a kestrel is a bird, right? Okay. Um, I mean, I presumed as such given the flying that was being done. Um, but um yeah, like I think that one also like I think like in using like animals in place of humans, it like the it he's able to describe these like really big things in a way that's like well known. Like I'm thinking like just in terms like I'm thinking about the the migration animation movie, which I didn't see it, but I know Stephanie you talked about. And but like I think like the yeah, so I'm just like I'm thinking about that because I know like I think I know that like birds and like butterflies are often like used in these stories of like displacement and migration and for good reason.
The ending to this one was so like devastating to
Yeah,
me.
perfect.
Mhm.
Yeah. Um, and like, the way that and it's so like reading this right now is just a different level of like sadness and just despair, but like, like literally not being able to return to Palestine. Like it's and then like the bitterness and the black light. I'm like, damn, like it's just it is crazy how like using an animal, I don't know, like it's just interesting because I also think of like there was like, I mean, not to, I guess, well, let's get into it actually, because there was this video of like some Israeli soldiers like kicking a dog and like throwing rocks at it. And I'm like, I know like there are several people who are going to be more upset seeing that than like the mass destruction being, um, you know, imposed on human beings. Um, so I think it's like an interesting choice to choose an animal for this, because it is such like it's a thing that humans experience, you know, but having it be an animal kind of makes it like in a way more like I don't know. It's just it makes it I don't know. I don't want to say like it makes it more universal to understand, but it does. It's just like a really amazing allegory. Like it just really I don't know. The fact that it's the flight and the freedom symbolism, it all comes together to just make it super I don't know. Like I was like almost on the verge of tears for like this bird. So it's like, I don't know. But I thought that was really interesting and really relevant right now. And like for the last 100 years, of course, but like right now especially.
Um, with that, it like the description of like a bird versus if you guys can remind me which story this one was, but that's telling about like this young girl like in Gaza and like an average day in her life and then like the her whole life like being displaced like and like I'm not sure which story that one
The
was.
story of my building.
Oh yeah, the story of my building. So I think with that one being like a child and like the emotions that are brought up there with like first you're like super invested and like oh what's happening in like her grades and like in school her like report card and all those things and then like in this one um I also this one was the framing of those two stories like having similar elements but yes like with a bird but also the structure of the story I think I was immediately able to lock in as soon as I saw like the name of the story because I was like oh what is it like these numbers and this is like kind of like a transcript and like it it felt like something. Yeah, the transcript felt like action was happening and I felt I was like seeing something like unfold and reading through that definitely made me like lock in like as a reader and just like see like okay like what like what is happening there and um everyone does like have their own image of like birds like being free so with that ending, it did just make it like extra tough. Um, but also the one with like the child and having a little bit more of like a narrative like element to like that story, I would say is also one that made me feel like very emotional like as I was reading it. Um, And then the subtle elements of like for the story right after, like the frame from the sky, where the dad is talking about his time in New York, and he says, I went to museums and saw dinosaur bones and art that originated in my birthplace and had, like me, been transported all the way over here and given a strange name, a practical name, anything other than Palestinian. And those tiny little like details still being like equally as like gut-wrenching like despite like the different like framings of them was something that like I thought was like super like skillful for like Rhonda to be able to do. Yeah, like being able to know how to end these stories is just like really crazy.
I thought they all had like perfect endings too.
Ah,
Like I would finish one and be like, damn, and then start the next one, and then the same thing every time. They just all wrap up like so well, and I think they leave you wondering, like in a really intentional way, which I just really loved and appreciated, but not too much where you were like out of like in a totally different headspace before you would go into the next story.
yeah. Um, with the story of wait, sorry, story of my the sto the story of my building. Um, one of the things that caught my attention was the portrayal of Uncle Fozzie, and like in the beginning of him being like a hater. So like as soon as like they would like that one line when they'd said when they were mentioning, he was like, "Oh, why are you defending them? Like you're defending like the Zionists, like all that." And like he leaves the room and is literally like huffing from the other room, like super upset. And everyone is like characterizing him as, I mean, well, from that I like picked up that he was like um in contrast to the other characters portrayed as like bitter, and but you're also like in her own point of view and like very like naive to like the larger issues on like what would lead him to think that. And then with the end of the story as like um the the bombing is like taking place, when he's the one who finds her, and instead of being like super like sympathetic, he's like where did you go all night flying around like a stray hair, like did you see what happened? And she just like nods and he says like, oh, don't worry, everyone here is waiting for you in the apartment, they all thought you were dead. Like the way he just like very like nonchalantly like drops that line and is all like, yeah, everyone just like they just thought you died, and goes over and like like lets, I don't know, the those like moments of alienation, not only from like a place where she knew as like safety, but looking at like her uncle and like her family member and like trying to seek that comfort, but he's like using his cane. And like the line where she says like, we walked away from the market, I envied the cane in his grasp and wished it were my hand in his. And so I went to this building where my parents were escaping the bombing. And so I went with Uncle Fozzie, who to his building where my parents escaping the bombing had sought refuge. But the idea of like a little girl looking at her uncle and like wanting to hold his hand, but and being jealous of like a cane was, oh, that one just like really, really got me.
The one quote actually the
Yeah, and the just like the portrayal of kids in general. I thought like kids had just such an interesting like role throughout so many of these stories. And like the kids as like fortune tellers, that one was also, I forgot which story that even was, but like imagine asking your kid like what's gonna happen next.
I think that might have been him, me, Muhammad Ali, but I'm not sure. Because I
Yeah,
remember
I
her
think
saying
it
like,
was.
yeah, says, will mommy be sick for long?
Oh
And
yeah.
as always, I said yes. And that's just like, damn, God. This was like such a roller coaster. Like every single story. It's insane that it was only like 15 pages stories because I like lived a whole life through every single one of them. Even if it was like moments in the story, it was just incredible. His writing is unbelievable. I'm so glad that we read this one because I definitely will read more from this author.
the one I think A Frame for the Sky, there I think that one is a really good I know we've talked about it a lot, but I think it encapsulates a lot of like the themes that were mentioned, and but when the character was like describing him, like hearing about his mother's death, and then thinking of the I thought of the way mother cooked eggplant and how her head, which she never covered, would let go a single black hair, dispatching it into the sauce, and how that hair always found its way um into its way to the dish and into my mouth. And just then I thought I'd accepted the fact of never tasting it again. I screamed, and then like, yeah. And then the and the talking about like how governments reflect their societies and religions, I thought was like really crazy too. Um
Even a little past that, when you said like he screamed and then he like did an X in the sky, that like I was like wondering, I was like, oh my, I just pictured it exactly. Like imagine like feeling such like a reaction and then like making an X, like that's it, like it's done, or like crossing something out. Like, oh, that's just so sad. I with like the part that from that story of like the government as like a reflection of like society and religion, but also thinking about like religion tied to like misogyny and like attitudes like towards women, which obviously is like brought up in like so many different ways. But the one that really caught my attention, and as I was reading, I like had to stop and just look around. Like I wanted to be like, did anyone else like did you just hear that? Even though it was like just me reading. But on page 156, where she's talking with her grandpa and him mean Muhammad Ali, and I asked him what stories the imam told, and he said stories about infanticides before Islam, and then told the story about how men would like bury their daughters, and then he was like he dug a hole, put her body in, and crouched down and began to cover her. Halfway through, she reached up and brushed off some sand that had fallen onto his thick beard. And then it was her saying, my eyes widened in shock. And the grandpa's like, I know, it's amazing. And she says, so he spared her? And the grandpa waited a few seconds and looked up and he's like, no, he still buried her. And that one just really shocked me because first, you can trust grandpa to say something out of pocket and be so chill about it. Like, not him just like sharing this whole story about like how much they hated women, that they were kind of just like, yeah, they would bury these little girls. And once this little girl like just like brushed his chin and was like, oh, you have something there. And he was like, oh. And then just like again shoved her back, grabbed her hand and like put it back down there. But um I thought that I had the same reaction as she had in that moment, where she like my eyes widened in shock, and because you're like, oh, like that's so amazing, and like that's how where the shift happened, like that's probably it's gonna have a beautiful ending, and then um the way it didn't just seems like such a reflection of everything else and every other like all other religious roots that like I've encountered um like in like Catholicism with like attitudes towards women, like yeah.
yeah, that was a grandpa ass story
Yeah.
to tell.
I always think about that, like the perspective of like how most things, especially historically, have been written by men for men, and
Mhm.
like how, like I bet there are lots of, or like thinking about how that story, he was like just like so casually bringing it up, and it's like really like visceral to women, but it's like, oh, that's sad, but like, I don't know, something about And then the fact that she said like she spent this whole story like mourning her mother more than she mourned her father. Like I just like think that's I don't know. That one was really that stuck out to me. Damn, but I can't. Oh, I like yeah, no, that one I was like, oh, oh, okay, good. And the fact that that still happens,
Yeah.
like the fact that that still happens, it makes me a lot of this just like reminded me of how early in history we are or we should be if we don't kill the planet. But like I'm just thinking like a lot of, a lot of shit is still really fucked up.
Mhm.
And that's my brave take for the day. So yeah.
A story that we haven't talked about that I didn't know what to make of it. And it was also one of the shortest ones was A Sailor on page 69. What did you guys like think about that story, or where was like your head going with the woman who had like an affair and like wants her husband to like be mad about it?
I literally forgot about that story until right now. Um, but it reminded me of this video essay that I watched recently about The White Lotus season 2. Even though I watched it like forever ago, I was like, huh, because they were talking about the power dynamics like of relationships and how, because in I don't know if you guys have seen season 2, but a lot of like the narrative is about like this couple like who cheats on each other, but it ends up quote unquote making their relationship stronger and how they like kind of use cheating as like a tool to like play games with each other basically. So that's what I was thinking, like that's what that story reminded me of because of like the whole like he wasn't giving in to her and like what she wanted. And I also liked how it was written and that we got to see like both of the characters like kind of internal motivations and then the ways they were behaving also like at this we got to see all of that at the same time. But I do agree, I was like, huh, what does it all mean?
Yeah, I just kept rereading the same like last sentence again and again because I was just like, did I really like I'm like um I feel like this is one of those parts in this book and like and like throughout the stories where you kind of like get told what is going on rather than like left with like one of the like something that you're left like wondering about or thinking about like what's going to happen next, where like here you get to see like yeah, as like you mentioned, Lauren, like both of their reasons. And I didn't feel sympathetic to like any character like in particular, like either the husband or wife. I kind of just was like both like what are you guys doing here? And it felt like so defensive on both parts. Um and especially the part where it's like um yeah, where they're just making like assumptions about each other on what they how they think the other person should react, but then being upset when they kind of like follow those same like attitudes. Um yeah.
Yeah, that story didn't really stand out to me. Like again, I also forgot about it until you, until you said it. Um yeah. Um movie rec though. I watched it recently when I was in a feverish state of delusion. Um and the runtime is over 3 hours long, but it's I think worth it immensely. It's called Yee Yee Y I. Have you seen it, Mackie?
No, it's been on my list forever, and because I have like TikTok brain, I'm like, That's so long. I'm just gonna be on my phone that long instead. Like,
Yeah. It
but
like
yeah.
I had to do it in two sittings just because it's like a lot. I think 3 hours is a lot. But it's a Taiwanese film like about like family beef. So it's like really just like crazy and like follows a lot of like the different family members. And I think is poetic, like the writing is like very poetic in the same way that like this felt. And I have just been thinking about it so much, and like a lot of like the family dynamics are really insane, and like definitely like it's really crazy but really so beautiful, and it's like all about like love and loss and like falling in love, getting your heart broken, and like there's one quote in the movie that's like something along the lines of like you people like movies are incredible, and like you're able to like people who watch movies extend their life by like 3 times because like you're able to like live multiple lives and like watching a movie, and like you're able to like experience what it is like to like witness a murder without like actually having to witness a murder. And so I think that like this I felt like I feel the same about reading like that's how this book feels like. Mackie, I think you were like I lived like 15 different lives like in reading this book, like but yeah, it's just really I don't have I have I have pea-sized brain right now and don't have the words to describe how awesome it was, but it had a lot of really beautiful tidbits of wisdom that I think are really crucial to growing and learning people like us.
Where did you watch it on?
That oh sorry.
Um, I did watch it on D's Criterion.
Oh,
Um,
okay.
so I don't know. I think it honestly might be on YouTube though. Let me
I
see.
just looked up the movie and I it's the English title is a one and a two. Like, does that mean does that mean anything to you? Or like is that
Um,
I'm just like
I
that is so interesting.
yeah, I don't really know. Like I think it's like there if I recall it's a one and a two dot dot dot.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I think it's like very like it's very slice of life like uh kind of thing. So it's like there you're kind of just like thrown into whatever's happening, and then like life goes on after that, like after you're finished watching the movie, but like there's so much packed into it, and like a lot of like yeah, it's really beautiful. 6 stars. 6-star movie.
So Lauren should watch it now that she's like sick.
Yeah, Lauren is in what I was in 2 days ago.
Yeah. Do you guys have the stomach flu?
No.
think
Okay,
so.
that's big in Cincinnati right now, apparently.
Damn.
I was around children for one day and then I got the stomach flu.
What? No.
And I
These
watched
damn kids.
Phantom Thread, and it's
Oh.
like if you guys have seen that, there's like a lot about being sick and I was like, "Oh man." Something about watching a movie sick just changes the way you view it too. I don't
It
know.
totally does.
It's so
I don't know what it
like
is, but
yeah, something about it. It really is that like delusional like dream-like state.
Yeah.
You kind of just like oh man.
I feel like
Now
now it's
I have to watch it.
oh yeah.
Sorry.
I'll be waiting for your review.
Yeah, I'll be on
Um
Letterboxd.
I was just gonna say I feel like now's a good place for us to like wrap up if anybody has any last remarks or recs.
The one thing that I was reminded of from the Building Girls is Portrait of a Lady on Fire. Um, just in like the way that those movies both like portray the yearning and like the like taboo of two women, but it's not like a one-to-one, but the ending, like the endings kind of mirror each other, I think.
Saving Face, I feel like, is also a really good one. If anybody hasn't seen it, you should see it. But I think that's also a really it I just love gay people, but I like it um centers around like the cultural, familial, uh exploring sexuality like in um uh non-white cultures
Mhm.
in America.
Um, I have a rec that came up like so many times while reading this in like different stories. A Small Place by Jamaica Kincaid, who is an author a Caribbean author that talks a lot about like colonialism, and A Small Place focuses so much on tourism, and the whole book is Jamaica Kincaid directly addressing tourists, being like, you will walk up to the nearest taxi and you will see like a brown man, like blah blah blah, blah, and you will ignore that brown man until you see like another one who offers you a cheap ride. You suspect he's gonna scam you, but like you get on it anyway. And like she kind of just takes you through like a day in your vacation, but is so mean to the reader. Um, and ripping like the reader to shreds, being like, you like in the hotel, the resort you're staying in, like the workers there were like displaced because of blah blah blah, blah, but now you get to sit and like enjoy this, and the worker goes up to you and accidentally spills this, and you want to yell but you also feel like sympathy, like blah blah blah. And that kind of like, you feel so, when I read it, so she's speaking directly to what you would like assume is like a white American. Um, but there's no backing out. Like as soon as you start reading the book, you're like confronted with all of those like feelings and like emotions and judgments. And I feel like that's a lot of what I saw in this story, especially in Building Girls, and like the main character in that story looking at like these like PhD students and other depictions of like Americans, or even like first generations like children like going back to their like parents like hometowns, and like, the judgment they would face there. Um yeah, definitely thought a lot about A Small Place, and there's just so much layers to like ethical tourism, but and like whether or not it really exists under like capitalism and like colonialism. But I think that A Small Place does a really good job like capturing those things and like putting people in their place.
I just looked it up and the fact that it's from like the 80s too, that's really like ahead of its time, you know. I feel like
Mm,
the idea of like tourism still doesn't get like, especially with I think of like Hawaii, like
yes.
especially it's like people still don't really realize what it means to be a tourist, especially, you know, white people. So
Mm.
that's awesome. I love it. It's like immediate.
Yeah, it's
Like,
like pretty short too, like the book itself.
yeah.
I'm really trying to think if there was something else. There's just so much that I know that like this meeting's gonna end, and I'm gonna be like, damn, I didn't say that, but okay, while those thoughts, if please feel free to interrupt if like you guys do think of any more last minute remarks or thoughts. but I also wanted to shout out our next book of the month that we're super, super excited for, which is going to be Radic Disability Intimacy by edited by Alice Wong, and there's like lots of contributors. So our friend Alice Wong, we read Year of the Tiger maybe like a year.
Almost a year and a
Time
half
time
ago.
is not real, so yeah, a year and a half. Okay, yeah, Year of the Tiger was so good, and Alice Wong also edited Disability Visibility, which is also like a lot of stories. But yeah, Year of the Tiger. But Disability Intimacy focuses on love and sex, like different relationships, and just like lot of great contributors in that um like anthology. So check that one out. I'm so excited to have an excuse to read more things that Alice Wong, more of Alice Wong's projects, but I feel like that will also carry a lot of um the last story. As I was reading the last story, I was like, whoa, this is the perfect bridge to like the next book we're gonna read. Oh, okay, sorry. This is my last minute thought. But when we were talking about like allusions to like sexuality, the last story made me, I don't know why, but I was just thinking about sex so much. I was like, oh, if you're like half Ibex, is it Ibex what the thing she was? Yeah. I was like, how does that, and you're talking so much about love. I'm like, is this like what's being brought up? And also what does it mean that like your partner cheated on you with someone who's half bull? Like, is that like better? Or like what does that mean in this world? But yeah, please check that one out and let us know what you think. Or if any recs do come to mind, feel free to reach out.
Yeah.
I'm
And
so excited to read this one. Sorry, I was like gonna read it anyway, and I'm like, yes, we get to talk about it. So I love Alice Wong. Like that Year of the Tiger is one of my favorites we've ever read,
Yes.
I would say.
oh yeah, Disability Intimacy also just came out like last week. So we're gonna be among the first ever. Is Stephanie frozen for you guys? Not anymore. She's
I froze. I froze.
um oh Bookspace is like ordering books for us again. So um for Maya, if you're wanting to buy it, Mackie, if you want it delivered, it's it'll be there. And I doubt that there is going to be PDF access, but I know that she has um audiobook audio versions available for that one.
I just looked it up, and it's actually they're all on hold right now, but there are copies at least Cincinnati Library, which is awesome. They're like 12 copies already, so hopefully Columbus Library has them too.
Yeah, I just put it on hold at my local library.
So
Well, thank you all.
Yeah, with
Thanks for
that,
organizing.
thank you guys for coming and for being here. This was a really exciting discussion today. And I the intimate book club discussion I think worked in our favor.
True.
Yeah, we literally hit every story, I think.
Yeah.
Feel better, Lauren.
Thanks.
And Morgan, I'm glad that you're on the up of whatever Lauren has.
I'm gonna go make food for baby.
Oh.
Yeah. Lauren,
Yeah,
it's my turn to treat you.
Aw. Wow, guys.
thank you everyone for your time. Literally hit us up. Any questions or thoughts mid through reading the next book or about this. But yeah. Enjoy the rest of your Sunday night and thank you. Bye
Thanks,
everybody.
everyone.
Thanks, guys. Bye.
Bye.